Did you know that 2 people have died on the Matterhorn? Did you also know that someone was killed by the monorail? Come explore this and more with me on the Imagination Files. Let's begin on August 21st, 1967, with a young 17-year-old boy named Ricky Liyama. It's around 9:30 p.m., and he is visiting the park with a group of friends. They decide to go ride on the People Mover. This was a transportation attraction on an elevated track giving them a tour of Tomorrowland. It was a very slow ride, moving at a measly 2 miles per hour, and had only opened a month earlier. Witness reports say that Ricky ignored warning signs and tried to step across an 18-inch gap between the one he had been riding in and the one behind him while it was going through a section called the Super Speed Tunnel. This section was near the Current Space Mountain area. Needless to say, Ricky slipped and fell between the gap and was crushed to death underneath the moving ride vehicles. Next was zip forward to June 22, 1973, to an 18-year-old Bogdan Delarue and his 10-year-old brother Dorian. The 2 boys took the normal raft across the rivers of America to Tom Sawyer's Island. Wanting to stay on the island past its closing time, they both climbed a fence separating the island from the burning settlers' cabin. After a few hours on the island, around 9:40 p.m., they decided they wanted to leave. Not wanting to call attention to the rule breaking, they thought the best thing to do would be to swim across rather than trying to get help from a cast member. A massive search was launched with the Anaheim Police Department, the Anaheim Fire Department, and Disneyland Security. But once Bogdan went under the water, he wasn't able to be found until the next morning around 5:30 a.m. when they pulled his lifeless body from the river near the rapids section of the river. Now we'll step 1 year into the future to July 8, 1974, to an 18-year-old Deborah Gale Stone. Deborah was a new employee who had just graduated from high school from Santa Ana High School. She was the hostess who would greet guests between acts for a new ride that had just opened 9 days earlier, America Sings. This ride was an audio animatronic attraction featuring animal characters celebrating American music history through rotating the audience around a stationary stage where they performed. The stage being stationary and the audience section moving created pinch points between the walls. Deborah positioned herself in the wrong place right in the area of a pinch point. As the audience began to rotate to the next section, Deborah was crushed between the moving wall and the stationary wall. A guest in the theater section next to the one reported hearing her screams, but thought it was part of the show. When other cast members were finally notified and the ride stopped, she had already succumbed to her injuries and was officially pronounced dead at 11 p.m. After this, Disney added significant changes to their safety protocol, including installing breakaway walls to prevent similar accidents from occurring in the future. The first death at Disneyland occurred 9 years after its opening. In May of 1964, Mark Maples, a 15-year-old boy from Long Beach, California, was enjoying a day at the park for an after-hours Elk Club event. He and 2 classmates decided to ride on the Matterhorn bobsleds together. The Matterhorn has a pair of intertwined steel roller coasters running through it covered by a facade that replicates the actual Matterhorn mountain in Switzerland. The thing you must know about the Matterhorn is that it's a rough ride, shakes a lot, and has a lot of sharp turns. Mark stood up as his bobsled began to make its descent down the mountain. While the train was traveling about 20 miles per hour, Mark hit his head on the concrete side of a mountain, knocking him unconscious and falling about 1 foot onto the track area below. When the bobsled reached the bottom, his classmates tried to tell cast members about Mark falling out. They didn't believe the boys until it was confirmed by 2 girls who were in the bobsled behind theirs. A cast member eventually had to climb up the mountain and found Mark unconscious near the edge of the track. He would ultimately never regain consciousness. With a fractured skull and internal injuries, he ended up dying 3 to 4 days later in the hospital. While there have been some questions about the possibility of his classmates unbuckling his seatbelt and hazing him, investigators ultimately found that there was no evidence of this happening or any hazing of any kind. There are reports, though, that Mark had a heated argument with a 14-year-old girl named Christy Dorr on the Skyway gondola, and that his friends had to physically hold him back from jumping out of the gondola. About 20 years later, on January 3, 1984, a 47-year-old Dolly Regine Young from Fremont, California, was enjoying a day at the Happiest Place on Earth when she decided to go ride the Matterhorn as well. It was about 3:30 p.m., and Dolly was riding in the back of the bobsled alone. Even though she had come to the park with friends, as it entered the Skyway Tunnel section, she was thrown from her bobsled onto the track below. About 33 seconds later, another bobsled came hurtling around the corner, with her still on the tracks. The people in the bobsleds reported that they initially thought Dolly was a mannequin or a prop for the ride. Since she was in the back of the ride and alone, no one actually saw Dolly fall out or what happened, besides the report of a woman on the Skyway saying that she saw a lady bouncing on her back on the tracks and that she thought she saw her trying to get up. When the bobsled that Dolly was riding in got to the bottom, investigators report that her seatbelt was unbuckled. They never determined if Dolly unbuckled it herself or if it was a seatbelt malfunction leading to her being thrown out of the vehicle. We're going to zip forward about another 20 years to September 5th, 2003, and a man named Marcelo Torres, who was 22 at the time. Marcelo and his best friend decide to ride the wildest ride in the wilderness, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. For those that don't know, Big Thunder Mountain is a mine train ride where you go through different tunnels and sections representing gold mines. Most people love getting the front seat of a roller coaster, but unfortunately for Marcelo, that would be fatal for him today. About an hour before the accident would occur, a third train would be added to the tracks. This would be the train that Marcelo would ultimately lose his life in. As soon as it was added to the tracks, ride operators reported hearing unusual noises coming from the train. Instead of immediately taking it off the tracks to be serviced and looked over, it's reported they decided that they would let it run for a bit. They planned on taking it off the tracks for inspection after its 13th circuit. On its final run before the ride operators planned to pull the train for servicing, Marcelo would board that front seat right behind the locomotive with his best friend right next to him. The train would continue normally for about 2/3 of the track. As it came into a tunnel, the fasteners on the left side unstop guide wheel on the floating axle of the locomotive were not tightened in accordance with specifications. The axle came loose and jammed into the braking area and sent the locomotive into the air and crashed down on Marcelo, pinning him under the locomotive's wreckage and causing him blunt force trauma to his head, chest, and severe internal bleeding. 10 other passengers were also injured, one of those being Marcelo's best friend. This time, we'll head back to June 17th, 1966, to grad night at Disneyland and a very young 19-year-old Thomas Guy Cleveland from Northridge, California. You see, grad night in 1966 was a very exclusive and high-security event for high school seniors. Due to tickets being limited and strictly controlled, it was common for local teens to try to hop the fence and sneak in. On this day, Thomas decided it would be a good idea for him to try to sneak into the park. The spot he tried to sneak into the park requires that he climb over a 16-foot high outer perimeter fence and hop onto the monorail track that circles the park. As he was on the tracks, a security officer urgently tried to warn him of the oncoming dangers for several minutes. Thomas ignored the officer's warning about the train and stayed on the tracks to avoid being caught and trespassed from the park. Thomas saw the train coming though. Realizing the height was too great to jump straight to the ground, he attempted to jump onto a nearby canopy right below the beam that the monorail travels on, believing that the train would pass safely over him. Thomas believed wrong. The undercarriage of the monorail struck him in the head and dragged his body 30 to 40 feet, killing him. Not many rides have killed multiple people at Disneyland, but the People Mover is an exception. 13 years after the first death on the People Mover, it would take another victim. This time, it would be 18-year-old Gerardo Gonzalez of San Diego. Occurring on grad night on June 7th, 1980, his death was eerily similar to the first one, with Gerardo hopping between the moving cars and falling between them as the ride entered the superspeed tunnel, just like what happened to Ricky Lee Young. He was run over and crushed by the oncoming train of cars and was dragged approximately 100 feet before the ride operator could trigger the emergency stop. This was due to the ride being in continual motion, and the accident occurred in a dark tunnel section of the ride, causing people not to notice what happened right away. Gerardo was declared dead at the scene. 3 years after Gerardo's death, on June 4th, 1983, 18-year-old Philip Strawn and a friend of his were enjoying the park on grad night, which also happened to be Philip's 18th birthday. They had been drinking to celebrate, and around 11:30 p.m. decided to enter a cast member-only section near the Rivers of America. Here, they found a small, 2-man inflatable maintenance boat with an outboard motor. They took the boat for a joyride around the river and ended up striking an artificial rock that caused the boys to be hurled into the water. Philip's friend managed to swim to shore and alert cast members of what happened. Philip himself was not as lucky. An exhaustive search by Disney security and Anaheim Police Department eventually found the body of Philip face down in the water. He was pronounced dead at the scene due to drowning, and a coroner's report revealed that there were no head trauma or other injuries from the boat striking the rock, and that Philip was likely conscious. He was just unable to stay afloat in the water. One of the more tragic deaths at Disneyland happened on September 22, 2000. 4-year-old Brandon Zucker and his family decided to go on Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin. Roger Rabbit's is a dark ride where you travel through the world of Roger Rabbit in a spinning taxi. While loading into the ride vehicle, Brandon's mother and brother got in first, and then he was seated closest to the opening of the ride vehicle, which had an open cutout to walk in and out. During the ride, Brandon fell out of the vehicle and was hit and pinned under the vehicle behind them. He remained trapped for approximately 10 minutes before first responders and emergency personnel could extricate him from under the vehicle. Reportedly, Disney had a protocol of calling Disney security first before 911, which resulted in the delay of Brandon getting help. Investigators determined that loading protocol was not followed, where Brandon should have gotten in the ride vehicle first and farthest away from the entrance gap, and that there was a safety bar malfunction that allowed him to fall out of the vehicle. He suffered severe internal injuries, cardiac arrest, and brain damage. Amazingly though, he remained alive and under 24-hour care in the hospital until he died due to complications from the accident 9 years later after the original accident on January 26, 2009. For our next story, we'll go to Christmas Eve, 1998. 34-year-old Luan Phi Dawson and his wife Liu Toi Wong were standing in line to get on board the sailing ship Columbia, a full-scale replica of the Columbia Rita Viva, the first American ship to circumnavigate the globe. This ship travels around the rivers of America, giving you a feeling of what it would have been like on the actual ship. As they were waiting in line, the ship came into dock to allow the other passengers to get off. In this instance, multiple things came together to cause a horrendous accident. An assistant manager, who was reportedly not trained on the station, was filling in for a regular cast member and attempted to moor the ship to the dock while it came in too fast and overshot the dock. The rope used on the ship was a nylon mooring line rather than a less strong traditional hemp rope that would have snapped. Since the nylon rope was more elastic and strong, instead of snapping, it ripped the 8-pound metal cleat that it was wrapped around from the ship's wooden hull and sent it soaring through the air like a slingshot and into the crowd waiting to board the ship. The cleat struck 3 people, Luan, Liu, and an employee. The employee suffered a fractured ankle and mangled foot. Liu suffered severe facial disfigurement and trauma, and Luan was struck in the head, causing him to become brain dead and die 2 days later. It was also reported that the aftermath of the accident was so bad that even cast members that weren't physically injured had to be hospitalized for extreme psychological shock and trauma. There have also been some deaths at Disneyland that weren't due to a ride malfunction or anything out of the ordinary happening. For example, on June 25, 2000, a 23-year-old woman named Cristina Moreno and her new husband from Barcelona, Spain, were visiting Disneyland for their honeymoon. They rode Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye at some point during their trip. After exiting the ride, Christina began complaining to her husband of severe headaches. Later, when they returned to their hotel in Hollywood, she would collapse and lose consciousness. It was discovered that she had had a brain hemorrhage and was believed to have been caused by the violent shaking from the Indiana Jones ride. She was transferred to a hospital in Spain, but ultimately never regained consciousness and died on September 1st, 2000 from the brain hemorrhage. Another instance of a ride possibly causing a medical episode was on August 14, 1979. Cheryl Ann Hoffman, a 31-year-old woman, decided to ride Space Mountain, a roller coaster that simulates flying through space in a rocket and is fast-paced with lots of turns. As the ride was coming back into the station after she rode it, she complained of feeling ill and weak and was unable to exit the ride at the unload station. A Disney cast member reportedly told her to stay in her seat while they prepared to pull the ride vehicle off the main track and onto a siding for assistance. There was a breakdown of communication with the other ride operators, and she was sent around again before she could be let off. During this ride-through, she was believed to be in a semi-conscious state. When the train came back into the station, Cheryl was unconscious. She was transported to the hospital, where she died a week later due to a previous heart tumor becoming dislodged and traveling to her brain, causing a terminal embolism. As of the recording of this video, the most recent death at Disneyland occurred on October 6, 2025. An unnamed 6-year-old woman was found unconscious in her dune buggy while riding the Haunted Mansion, which is a slow-moving dark ride that takes you on a tour of a haunted mansion. An autopsy was not performed, and her death was ruled as an unfortunate accident by the coroner. Due to the slow nature of the ride, it's not believed that the ride played a role in her death. There have also been deaths not due to a ride at all. On March 7, 1981, a fight broke out during a private party in Tomorrowland, near the submarine voyage that was for employees of Roar Industries with about 10,000 employees in attendance. 28-year-old James O'Driscoll fatally stabbed 18-year-old Mel C. Yorba shortly after 10 p.m. after a confrontation broke out between the two. James alleged that Mel had pinched his girlfriend, and reports suggest that Mel may have been intoxicated. Mel was stabbed twice with an 8.5-inch knife and punctured his liver, diaphragm, and heart. James then fled, disposing of the knife in the moat around Sleeping Beauty's castle and his blood-soaked t-shirt in the bathroom. He was later found hiding in the bushes of Adventureland. It is reported that Mel bled for roughly 20 minutes before a decision was made to transport him to the hospital. It was also reported that instead of calling the Anaheim Fire Department, Disneyland staff transported Mel in the standard non-medical park van driven by a nurse and 2 security guards. It is said that the van lacked sirens, lights, and life-saving equipment, and that it bypassed 2 nearby trauma centers to take him to a hospital in Garden Grove. He was already in cardiac arrest by the time he arrived at the hospital. On April 22, 2003, a 36-year-old stage technician named Christopher Bowman fell 60 feet from a catwalk in the Hyperion Theater in California Adventure. He was working on the production of Disney's Aladdin, a musical spectacular. He was testing special effects for the magic carpet platform rigging and track. He was rushed to the hospital with massive internal and head injuries and was in a coma. He did not regain consciousness and died on May 18, 2003, almost a month after the accident. Even the parking lot at Disneyland isn't exempt from death. Let's get back to September 14, 1985. A 7-year-old Jennifer Reed was walking with her uncle back to the car after spending the day at Disneyland. In the parking lot where California Adventure is now, she tripped and fell into the path of an oncoming charter bus and was crushed to death. About a year and a half later, on March 7, 1987, a 16-year-old boy was shot to death in the same parking lot. His name was Salasai Tai. Reports say that a confrontation occurred between the group Salasai was with and a group that included 18-year-old Kalatai Nae, after both groups had just left Videopolis, a popular teen dance club at the time, around 1 a.m. Described by police as rival gangs, the Samoan Warriors and the Sons of Samoa, the two groups began a shouting match with each other that turned into a physical brawl involving 15 to 20 people. Kalatai shot Salasai several times in the back and chest. Salasai was taken to a nearby hospital but was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. There have also been many suicides at Disneyland Resort. There are 6 reported suicides from people jumping from the Mickey and Friends parking structure. Another 3 died by suicide from jumping from their balcony at the Disneyland Hotel, 2 of those coming from the 14th floor and the other one coming from the 9th. Lastly, there's a report that Carrie Moynihan, a 32-year-old finance manager with Activision Blizzard, died by suicide in her room at the Grand California Hotel during a work trip. As you can see, the happiest place on earth isn't always happy for everyone. Through these tragic deaths, Disneyland and the state of California have improved their safety protocols and procedures to make us all safer while there. There are many life lessons that can be learned through these horrible tragedies, none more so than to cherish each day like it's your last. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please click the next one. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment of what you'd like to see me cover in the future. And as always, remember, adventures out there.